Hello. Welcome in our studio. Sorry if we were a bit abrupt to leave the previous meeting, but we, as a performance group, we always prepare carefully an action like this before, and there's some reason to, because an hour ago some computers started updating automatically, which was blocking a next step in the pipeline we need. So anyway, welcome. I'll start with a quick historic overview, and I'll go back to 95. The years 95, 96, 97 were very interesting, since at that moment you had like an avalanche of all kind of new technologies which suddenly became available for the public. I'm talking about video games, 95. I'm talking about digital telephony, which grew suddenly very fast, even in Belgium. Other things like the internet. Internet had only 98,000 subscribers at that moment, so that was also booming. You had like the Wacom, which suddenly went online. You had like the first real.
So am I calling me to say that there still is the welcoming? At my computer it started, but this
that's cool.
Okay. And is there any other computer than the one of Anna who?
Okay, apparently there is a delay, so.
Yeah. Okay, so I continue, so at least you have a sound. We see everything here, so logically. Okay. So that period was an interesting period, 95, 97, because also in the arts, which at that moment were still kind of separated, suddenly it became clear that all this will become integrated. So as I was making cartoons at that moment, you were automatically able to animate them, to put sound on them, to stream them, to all these kind of things. So suddenly it became clear that the whole environment was about to change, which is what XR is a bit about now. In the meanwhile, I hope we have an image and that you can see something. If you do see something, then I'm in front of a drawing. In 95, Apple came out with the so-called QuickTime virtual reality tool, which was a way to stitch photographs to each other and turn them into a cylindrical 360-degree image. I adapted the process for making drawings. You can see the perspective is a bit funny, you see the lines, but then the nice thing was you could be inside. Going at the inside, would it be possible to do it with goggles and things like that? So that was the next step. So let's move to the next room. Okay.
Okay, they'll restart with their explanation.
Yeah.
Okay, they start again now. They'll start now.
Okay, welcome in our studio. I dropped the part about the excuse part. And I want to start to give a quick historical overview, because of course we'll have separate parts in the way we went from a particular way of using XR to the actual way. In my background is a drawing. It's a drawing I made in 96. In 95, Apple QuickTime VR came out. That was a way to stitch photographs to each other while making a panoramic tour with a photo camera. And you could turn that into a computer cylindrical image, and in that way you could be inside of the photograph. So we made drawings and things like that to be inside of the drawing. that period, 95, 96, 97, was extremely interesting because suddenly a whole bunch of technologies became available or suddenly started becoming very popular. The internet suddenly started booming. In Belgium, even in 98, I think, it was still 98,000 subscribers. And a year after, it already had 0 behind, I think. So it went very fast. Digital telephony, the computers that became faster so that you were, for instance, as an artist, able to draw in real time, which was not possible in 95. So all these kind of things made it clear for all artists, this is going to change. If we can integrate, or let's say the computer could integrate a lot of different media, and so you would see a new kind of fusion that we are seeing now. So let's move to the next room. Yeah, so we go to our so-called red room, and I'll start talking about the first experiments we did using VR. VR in the days, so 90s, yeah, so let's say end of the 90s, VR did exist, of course. It was very cumbersome, very expensive. You had big machines, you needed Onyx computers or Silicographics. So it was all very expensive, out of reach for regular artists, and certainly it was not fit to do something we did on the stage. So actually, as many times this turns into an advantage, so we had to come up with an alternative. And together with the University of Hasselt and with Philippe Beckart, who unfortunately passed away a few months ago, we built a complete, or rather he built a complete ecosystem of omnidirectional cameras, so 360 degrees cameras, a system to connect that to goggles, a system to track it, to stream it, to edit it, and so on. So let's simply start with the camera side. So these are the kind of cameras that we used. The principle is very simple. You have different cameras with fisheye lenses, and then you stitch that into one, not cylindrical, but spherical image. Our very first camera is over there. It is, of course, this was not so easy to make all these kind of combinations. So one side had a mirror of 180 degrees, and then there were 4 cameras that were being stitched. Of course, the latency, the quality of, most of all, the quality of the cameras was very low, and that will have an effect on how to work with these kind of tools. Of course, you need to see the image, and for that you have goggles. Goggles were available on the market. They were, we couldn't use them. So we bought a kind of goggles that were meant to use for television, that thing that quickly went out of the market. And then we made headsets on our own that you could fix to the head. It was important to have to fix the goggles in a stable way. Other easy ways to do that were simply put a bandage around the head and things like that. And also, yeah, maybe it's good to show that here. Another way was, the goggles are here, was that use medical plastics and just make a mold around your head, and so that afterwards you could always use it and put it on your head. It was, frankly, not much more comfortable, although we tried to make things that you could stay in for a while. We did tests, how long can you survive with these kind of tools. I think 7 hours was the maximum. Also, these plastics enabled sometimes to combine it with the cameras. As you can see, well, I'll pick it up here. So the idea was, inside you have goggles, outside you have that plastic. We fix cameras to it. Cameras are of different nature in that kind. They're like these. So these are much smaller cameras, but you need many more of them, and then you put them like this on your head, and we try to integrate them that way. These were the kind of clothes we gave people to wear all this kind of stuff. And in terms of computers, we see some of them there. The first computers were very large, and we had electric wheelchairs which we used to make them accompany the walking immersant, person immersed, we call it immersant. And then later on we had backpacks like these. And the backpacks also always have also a screen in front. The screen in front is a touch screen, and that allowed for the assistant, the personal assistant of the immersant, to do certain actions, to calibrate, to change sometimes from another movie, because we indeed had pre-recorded movies, which we then mixed with live cameras running around. So that enabled us to play with reality, engineer reality in a bit, like I could put you in your own image while you were walking through a room, an image that was taken 15 minutes earlier, or I could use the image of someone else walking and transport it to you, someone who's doing about the same. We did things like this even by satellite sometimes, from one city in Europe to another. But the point was that in a live situation you could make these video streams of yourself, of the other, or a camera outside, in a way that, how to say, puts you into a world that is somewhere in between. And also, I forgot to say that sometimes we also put cameras upon the head of the immersants, so that we could use their own image. If you ask what kind of things, what would be a story like, well, a very easy example was the first thing we made was about dementia, about Alzheimer. So the idea was you have someone inside, and we start restructuring your own tour that you have been making. So you came through halls, you came through a theater, you came to a particular space. We had recorded that, you being unaware. We had recorded it from your head, from behind you, and then later on you came in a world where you were walking around, where you suddenly saw yourself coming in, where you were following yourself. Sometimes it was real time, sometimes it was not real time. So this kind of actions were very interesting, and typically this period, our video-based VR period, was all about the self. The self automatically came into the center. Of course, you had a first-person view. Well, not necessarily. We could switch that. But so automatically, it was about the self. In the beginning, of course, the trick was to make people believe everything they saw. I think everybody with VR will try that at a certain moment. This was working perfectly well. I remember in 2005 and 2006, we had regularly people who actually were completely believing what we were presenting to them. The point was, is this interesting? We are an experimental company, so then we started turning things upside down, and we said, let's do exactly the opposite of what we did before. Let's start doing things very slow, the way that you are very well aware, okay, I'm here, and this is not what I see, or this is not what I am, and let's try to start from this situation, and that brought in something new. Suddenly we got very strong out-of-body effects. We had them before. You generate them pretty quickly, but they became very strong, which was a bit proof to the idea that instead of trying to work in the pure virtual, it's better to work in the middle of it. That is why you get this kind of effects. Anyway, so I should also mention that in the beginning, the first experiments we did were with people standing. There was a reason for that. We had them against this kind of tilting beds. We used them in a particular way, and we have been using them for years because in the build-up, let's say in the dramaturgy of a good immersive performance, it was a way to really take you into a different world, because with this simple thing you can, in a fundamental way, influence the senses, because we are not talking only about the heads and the ears and things like that, but also the vestibular system, the system that makes you aware what is your position in space, proprioception, the way that I feel my hand is here because it's linked to my body. All these kind of things are also very important, and they make that if you where do these ideas come from? Well, maybe I should quickly mention before these immersive tools, we were making performances with technology and with a paralyzed man, so he could only move his head. Here he is, Paul Antipov. We had a performance in which we had put him on the stage. We had made a pneumatic robot with hands, and he could steer the robot. So he had fixed at his face tools that enabled him to steer a keyboard, and on a monitor he could see through a camera certain things. So of course the first thing we thought about was he needed a helicopter view to know his position, because then we'll ask, for instance, take the glass. That didn't work at all, so he became sick of it. So the solution was rather strange. It was, after a while, we put the claw of here's the claw of the robot. We put a video camera on top of the claw of the robot, and of course, this does not correspond with a situation that we know. We have no eyes upon our hand. But if you can talk to the brain and make it clear that this is an extension of the body, the brain apparently immediately understands. So right from the start, he could nearly write with it. I'll show some aspects of that later. I think, yeah. So let's move into the studio. So in 2013, approximately, we moved into digital computer graphics, 3D, which again needed a different strategy than the video-based VR we were practicing. Ishtar will later explain in what direction that is going, but for instance, the idea of the self, which is so predominant in this kind of the other kind of work, changes. So we no longer have this kind of effects. Or phenomena. Effect sounds so cheap. So we are now working on a different basis, and since we also are in research, technological research projects, we have been busy a while with VP, virtual production, which is also a way of dealing with 3D material. We have a mocap studio with an optical tracking system, and we have the other system with the suits that we can also use wireless. I maybe should go now and show some movie stuff. Yeah, before we start, some of these footage has been used for other purposes, so please skip the text you read. These are some overviews of all the work, and first I want to go and take you to working with POF. Yeah, so here he is. So you see him from upside down. He was also doing things with these little robots. He could also draw digitally up on the stage. And here you see him using his robotic arm. You see the monitor which he's looking at. You see the tools that are fixed at his mouth, at his forehead, and things like that. He also needed assistance to breathe. So that gives an idea of that. So let's move then to the video-based VR work. When we're using these tables, we try to cut away every perception. So it was in the dark, you couldn't hear anything, and then we would move these tables and then finally put on the gear. And also, you have noticed maybe that there was a camera on top of the goggles, which we also used for a particular purpose. This is a head swap session. Here are some images where you see that we were registering or recording the immersion as he came in. You can see that they are following a kind of a wheelchair. We used very big computers still at that moment, and at moments also cables. Actually, yeah, here we just had an image of, there was a moment in a theater where someone asked us, "What are you trying to do? I'm working here, I know this place. You took me upside to the second floor, you took me outside, so what is the meaning of it?" So we had to convince him to just stay a while and look at the next person. You have been walking in a circle of 10 meters and you didn't go out at all. So the brain adapts all the time with the information it gets. But of course, as we, in the meanwhile, because this was 2005, as in the meanwhile, we all got used to technology in a physical way even. So every smartphone you have, it has at least 11 sensors inside that measure all kinds of things. So, so these kind of things no longer happen. Another barrier to take was, how can you take such experience to multiple people, because we are in theater. I'll continue later upon that. Here are some more images of the walks we made. So you see the camera following the person here, and of course there's always an actor who is talking to or accompanying the person. The liveness of the thing is extremely important. I go a bit further. Yeah, this was the part where we made a satellite swap in between Barcelona and Mons in Belgium. I go a bit further. And here I was talking about what do you do with many people. Terra Nova was a production in 2011. The strategy we were using there was, let's use the outside as well as the inside. So people, this was for 55 people. So in groups they go in and they go out. The story continues, and so you look from a different view. So sometimes you look from the inside and sometimes from the outside. But the effect, of course, is entirely different. The outside you get a story, at the inside you get an experience. And to choreograph that in a way, of course, was also revealing in terms of if people inside of their virtual world see things that make them do certain things. We didn't ask them. For instance, if you are at the street and you see in the immersion someone at the other side giving a sign or saying hello, automatically you will go to that person and you will even stretch your hand, something you will never do when looking at a movie, of course. But so then you have 11 people doing that at the same time, which is really touching to see. We've been using the VR of the previous period for documentaries, for horror movies, for musical sessions, all these kind of things. This was right after the tsunami in Japan. Let's move a bit further. Yeah, I switched this, although this is also XR, so we used a lot of things in installations because they were interesting. This was all about, wait, let's go to this one. Yeah, this is a cave we made to prove that you see space because you move, not because you have two eyes. So you move in a space, you close one eye and you have perfect 3D, and you move in a 3D world. Go further. This was working with virtual production tools. We use that in theater, on stage. So we use the virtual to look at, and everything you see here is fake. So the transparency is fake, the light is fake, the shadows are fake. And to do that, of course, we needed a particular procedure that I cannot explain now. We also had the actors textured, as you can see. Okay, and here some more images of how, this is the digital period, how to keep the idea of walking around, how to keep the idea of multiple people looking at and having people inside and still go through a story together. This was Hamlet's lunacy. Okay, so you have motion capture, people following, people inside, and at the end, everybody will go. I will have an immersion. Okay, last step to the digital is again large area. We have been developing together with other people tracking systems for very precise location to enable us to make productions in large spaces. What you see here is interesting to know how you sculpt a space in 3D. So this lady here sees a representation of a 3D table and feels there is a table. That in itself is enough to later on have any line you see in space to be careful. So you quickly install these kind of things in your mind. And I think that is a bit the end of my presentation. Oh, I forgot, yeah, no, I quickly indicate, we have been using this inside of research programs to turn it to different uses. Like here, this was together with a team of neurologists for making a treatment, a therapy in VR for depressive patients. It has been tested extensively in different means, and actually it works. I mean, of course, every individual insight is different. You still need a therapist, but the principle works, and the principle works better if you use space. That also has been proved, and there's a publication in a medical journal to be about that soon. Okay, so we are now using scans, 3D scans a lot, and that part will be told to you by Ishtar.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. So we now have to quickly switch projects because we have a lot of different sources and things going on. So the project we're going to present now is a bit of a copy. Ah, that's no good. Here, just go to the VR thing. I'll just talk while I change it. It's okay. So we work in different technologies, also in different game engines. So sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to have everything working together. So now we were going to start a representation of Hands-on Hamlet, but it's not exactly the way it looks. Normally it has different textures and things, but we don't have the latest version running here. So it should start now, and then we're in Hands-on Hamlet. So Eric is going to go in immersion, and so yes. So what we can see is the thing which is important in Hands-on Hamlet, and which was a major step forward for Crew, is that they started working with avatars animated in 3D in this way. And in line with the past evolutions, there's a juxtaposition of the avatars and what's to say the real world, the recordings that are made with a 360-degree camera during the registrations of the recordings of the performance. And so you can, so we don't have the sound now, but normally so you hear Hamlet speaking, but it's quite peculiar because the avatars are talking to each other, so they're kind of playing Hamlet together, and the immersant is moving through it a bit like a ghost, which is appropriate because of the ghost in Hamlet. And so the immersant is not acknowledged. So there's a completely different way of interacting with the environment and what goes on than in these 360-degree video pieces, where you are really at the center of the thing. Here you almost feel isolated and outside of the thing, but it gives you a particular perspective and another approach to how this goes. So you can see that these balls are floating in the air. You cannot see it in 3D, of course, because your image is flat. But normally you see them in 3D. You put your head in, and all of a sudden it goes full screen, and you're inside this image. And if you take your head out, then you're again in the other thing. And so it negotiates, I think it's very illustrative, it negotiates the space between the 3D and the 360-degree video in quite an efficient way. So we can now... Hayo, can you help me, please? Can you go out of Hands on Hamlet, and I can start my video?
Which video?
I'll start it. It's okay. Just put me in the. Where's my mouse?
Moet je wachten, ja.
Ik moet een video opstarten via de.
Via wat?
Nee, via VLC.
VLC.
Op de desktop.
Dat is oké.
Op de desktop. Nee, wacht. Ik zal het wel. Nee, dat is niet de juiste video, hè? Up. Sorry, it's all glued together with gaffer tape. That's the way we do it today. So if I can just find the right video, where is present? Present is. So here we are. So from this point onward, it was interesting to see how can we work with avatars, or what we call NPCs and agent and all these different things. Because if you work only with canned animations, such as in Hands on Hamlet, there's of course not a lot of interaction which is possible. This is a sketch that we made for Present, which was a research project where we collaborated mainly on this with INRIA. And so we made this sketch, which are traditional techniques in Unreal Engine for making sketches of avatar behavior and AI behavior in the project. So we made this sketch, and then we sent it over to INRIA, and we saw how it could interact with their technology. This is a more advanced example of AI in Unreal Engine. So this is a hide and seek bot. So every time the other robot hides you, he will go to some angle where he can hide. So we had a very productive creative loop with the people from INRIA. So it became kind of the basis for their research. So if you see it here, so what they did is they developed a system where the movement of agents is generated with a type of thing called interaction fields. And so every dot is an agent, and the way they interact is by force field. So every agent has a force field which can influence one or more agents, and in this way you can kind of create a social space. So you can define the rules of making a social space without programming every agent by hand. And so this, for example, here the blue agent is hiding from the red agent and will hide behind other agents. And so in this way we can approach crowds, which was interesting for us to see how could we do this without having to, I don't know if you play video games, but in video games the interaction with NPCs is often very static or predictable or things like this. And this is a much more fluid way of approaching it. It's also very researchy and maybe not as clean as some things that you can do, but it's very effective. For example, this is a simulation of a museum where you can see that you have these agents, and when the simulation starts, they start moving and they go from screen to screen, for example, which is a use case which is not very interesting for us, but it gives you an idea of the things that we could do. So, of course, you have the agents, but you also have the self. And as Eric said, it is very difficult to represent the self in 3D VR. There's no, if you have a 360 image of yourself, even if it's a recorded image of someone else and you don't see the face, you will immediately feel as if it's you. but in VR it just doesn't work that way. So a lot of work that we do is investigating how we can represent the self in VR, and it is sometimes less than obvious. For example, sometimes we have noticed that not having a body gives more sense of embodiment than having a body. This is an IK body we had. This is, until recently, this was kind of the state of the art of how to represent a body in VR. But now with the entire Facebook meta push into technologies, there's a lot of research piling into this. There are new approaches based on deep learning, which will help with this. But of course, then we are in the area of Zuckerberg, which is not a very nice area to be, but they are doing research which is very important to the idea of VR. So what is important as well is that we have environments, we have people. We work a lot on the environments. Actually, I will show you a couple of them later in VR. But for example, we did lately. We do very big scans. We don't only do scans, we also do procedural modeling and traditional modeling. For example, this is at the Tripostyle near the Gare de Midi, where we took, I think, 100, wait, let me see, I think we have about, yeah, something like, I think 200 scans or something on top of a bunch of, yeah, 89 scans which are recognized. Anyway, so it's a lot of scans. These then get processed. We can use them as a point cloud, which can be nice. We can also process them in a mesh, which I will show later for Delirious departures. So these are the type of things we like to do to be able to not only use it in VR, but also to prepare our performances and even to use it in the tracking. We're working on a new type of tracking where the scans are actually used as a reference point for, yeah, it has a hard time dealing with it, but as a reference point of where you are in the space. So these are the type of things that we are doing. The present project is over. We're now moving to a new project, but first I will show you Delirious Departures. So Delirious Departures is, let me start it. Delirious Departures is a piece that we started making during the pandemic. We were scanning railway stations and we were contacted by Europalia organization to ask whether we could do something around railway stations, so that was obviously very good. And when we started scanning, we noticed that because people were sitting very still due to social distancing and everything, that they would be in the scan solidified and part of the architecture, and we found that very inspiring. So within the present project, we do not only work on AI and tracking and things like this, but we also work on the representation of humans and how we feel towards different animations, representations, shapes of human encounters that you can have in the virtual. So we did a lot of aesthetic research on that. We did a lot of experiential research on that, which resulted in this piece, which then integrates part of the technologies, for example, the crowd simulations, etc., that we have from the present project. So I'm going to go in VR and see what it looks like. Can I have a controller, please? So, for example, one of the things that we learned, you will see that here we have pieces of scans and a lot of debris. One of the things that we learned is if you have too much detail, it can be hard for someone to actually see something else. If you have a very detailed image, it can become too impressive, and then people are not able to see an interaction or have an encounter with a human, for example. Normally we have Hario here in mocap. I'm not sure whether we're going to have him. Maybe not now, we'll have it later. So, for example, this debris that you see, it's all people who passed by and that we just didn't clean up in the piece. It's a way for us of, like, it's a bit like 3D shadows of people passing by, in a way. And so this is a corridor that you surely know of the Brussels Central Station, which is not a very pleasant place to be in general. And so you see that here the avatars acknowledge me, and they will try to avoid me. It's not perfect, but when you're in the immersion, it's actually quite intense. You feel that they're really coming up to you, and they're a bit attitudey. They kind of have an attitude, and so they do not only react to me, they also react to the performer when he's in the piece. Could you look at getting the mocap running? Okay, no, that's okay. We're going to look at it later. So yeah, so these are the type of avatars we make. We kind of work on the assumption that we do not believe in photorealism. We kind of make these sculptural, grungy avatars because they have a lot of personality, and it's not uncanny valley, because we feel that in VR especially, uncanny valley is very strong and unpleasant. So that was an example. For example, this is another example of the more stylized environments that we have, so that people can sit down. They sit down on an actual chair which corresponds with these benches. And then we have the canned animations and the actor, and they interact in a way that it becomes unclear what is alive, what is live, what is recorded, what is animated, and so forth. This is an example of our very high detail scans. So you can see that the people who are sitting down, they're sitting perfectly still. So this means that they're in at least 3 LiDAR scans without moving. Similarly, we see some debris of people who are moving, but we thought it was very fitting for this post-apocalyptic pandemic feeling that was running through the world in 2021. Yes, we have some different things, but I'm not going to show you the entire installation with some perceptual things and so forth. And this is Antwerp Central, as you recognize. We really chose to keep our scanner is not an amazing scanner, actually, which gives these very what we call the Chernobyl effect. So there's some noise, and there's a way that the mesh kind of collapses on itself and degrades, which we find aesthetically pleasing and very suitable for this project. So that is the idea of delirious departures. No, it's okay. We're gonna move to the next part. So let's see if I can get back into the camera. Maybe you can put the. It's gonna be okay. So, can you start the XR project? Then I will talk a bit about. So we are now part of a. Wait, let me see. Look into the camera. So we are now working on a new. We're working on a new Horizon project, which is called MaxR. It's with a lot of very heavy hitters industrially, people like the Foundry and these guys and things like that. And within it, we are working on the tracking system. As Eric mentioned, we work with the University of Hasselt for tracking systems, but also some. So now I showed you delirious departures. Delirious departures is one person in immersion and one person actor. This is good, but of course, if you're a cultural professional, you know that this is going to be a problem. So we're now expanding. We're now taking what we learned in the present project and in MaxR, and we're taking it to different levels by having multiple immersions streaming over wireless. We have University of Pompeu Fabro. We are optimizing the wireless network and such things. So it's a bit more of an innovation action. It's a more concrete way of working, but it's going to push us much further. So now we hope that we can do performances in spaces with we hope at least 8 people in immersion. But then an important part of the research is also which medium is the right medium for which type of content or kind of experience that you want to create. So you can layer the media, but you also have to think in VR, you experience things in a very direct fashion. You're a protagonist. You're in it in a very immediate way. If you are in, if you do things in XR, for example, by augmenting with virtual production, which I'm going to show in a bit, or different things, it's much easier to convey like embodiment necessarily, but you do have a way that we are trained to analyze images and so forth, where you can really direct the way people are looking and things like this, things which do not really work in VR. So we now started the very experimental XR project. I hope it's going to work. time. You don't want to work and do your sports and everything with a headset on. It's a pretty dystopic idea, but that does not mean that us in the arts and cultural sector cannot do interesting and intense things with it, which is a bit our proposition. So important for us is the free walking and the different things. So I think you can now see, I'm not sure what you see, but I think...
We can do us without VR.
Okay, so we do it without VR. So, why did the VR not work?
I think
Something crashed?
Conflict with other projects.
Okay, that's what I was afraid of. That's okay. So, this will be a demonstration of some very basic type of virtual production. If you don't know virtual production, it's all the rage in the VFX industry because they can actually visualize what's going on in the stage, and it works with a tracked camera. So, what we can do. The illusion only works if there's nobody standing in between. Eric, can you? Yeah, so it's not very laggy, but so you can see that the camera and the video, well, the camera and the video are synced in perspective, and so in this way you can start layering different types of images. But the thing is, because you're working with a game engine and everything is real time, you can have your real time content running through it, and you can start layering it, which can be very useful, especially for showing people what goes on in immersion, to overlay the reality with the VR and to choose which parts of it are visible and are not visible. Can be very creative, and then we can have different people in mocap suits, etc. Do you think your mocap will work now, or
It's working out.
it is working? Ah, yes, that's you. Okay,
Not,
you're not calibrated.
I'm not
Yes.
calibrated properly.
Yeah, so we can add different types of content, and then we can do the same in VR. So we cannot show it right now, but we can do the same in VR in the sense that we can take parts with see-through but also with video planes. We can take what's going on a camera and take it back in VR, making a really different types of layers of reality, which can be very creative in seeking like where is the disruption and where is the tension between these type of things. So that's kind of it for me. I don't know if you still want to say something, Eric?
Well, I think will there be questions?
Yes, so we will now go to
Please
the,
just wait to proceed,
but they cannot answer us because we have to move to Zoom.
Okay.
So we're going to stop the broadcast. We're going to paste the Zoom link in the chat. We do it with YouTube because otherwise the visual quality is not good enough. So see you in the Zoom where you can ask some questions, and if you don't want to ask questions there, we'll be later at IMAO for anything. So thank you very much, and see you on the other side.
Hi, Eric. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah. Thank you guys for the interesting presentation. I have a couple of questions. Like one is, at some point when you were referring to the first phase of Crew, then you were mentioning that it was, you were mentioning a middle point between VR, like virtual reality, and I guess like reality or something. That's
Yeah.
That's one question. The second was, I guess, is when you guys also move into 3D renders, that you also mentioned about the change on self-perception and the importance on this. And I guess all this leads me to the main question, the main thing that I have in mind is this relation between agent and self. That it was more mentioned for your colleague afterwards, and is when you guys mention agent is, for instance, an avatar. That's an agent, is it? Because I'm not completely.
Well, an avatar is an agent, but
Could be an agent.
yes, there are other types of agents than avatars, but here it is an avatar. Yes. So to answer.
Yeah, so sure. First question was like the middle between virtual reality and reality before you guys moved to 3D renders.
Yeah. Well, maybe I was not very clear. So the video-based virtual reality thing did work perfectly well being included in it. So you are walking around, you are in a virtual world that is being recorded, live or not live, but that uses the spaces usually that you were in. If I meant something in between, that has to do with the theory which we developed upon it, which we still use, by the way, and that we call a transitional space. So many people look at VR like, oh, you can make me believe that I'm completely somewhere else. In media language terms, it is about presence. So can you have 100% of presence? So complete belief that you are where the image is. It was not difficult to reach that, particularly a long time ago, because people were unaware of these kind of things. But at the same time, we quickly found out that this in itself is not so interesting. And if you start making people, so the strategy you use to make people believe it is that you keep them busy all the while and giving inputs that make them believe that they are there. So for instance, you will not wanting people to stop for a long time and so that with their feet they feel, oh, this is a different floor than what I see actually. So these kind of things. So you want to do everything to make people believe it. And so when we then started doing the opposite, well, we don't bother about this. You are well aware that you are in a construct here that suddenly produced something else. I must say that also had to do because, of course, the tactile here became important. Tactile information, auditive information, which is in conflict with the vision or with the standing or things like that, makes an interesting mix, which at the moment starts people really say, how can I be there when I'm here? Or how can my arm be there? Or things like that. So very strange things, rationally not possible. But so that is suddenly the perception, the self-perception you have that your body is there. Well, and meanwhile, we know well how to do these kind of things. But it means that if you use this input in a particular way, you have a world that is in between. So if you, if you would try to make the complete belief, it's no longer going to produce these kind of things. So it means that also as an immersant, in cinema, for instance, there is a belief that if you lose your concentration or you become suddenly aware of I'm sitting here, so then you move out of the story, you move out of the virtual world of the film, so which is bad, so you have a dip. And many people project that up onto this type of media. And actually the opposite is true. It's very nice to be aware of these kind of things. And in your head, you have the possibility you have agency to say, okay, now I would rather be here, I would rather be here, or I'm in, I'm out, I'm there, I'm here. So you can do this kind of thing. So that is in fact fantastic. But so that's the agency, which is interesting. So, so that is this world in between. So we don't need to do everything to make people believe what they see. It's not interesting. So it is this in-between world. And as I said, the tactile has to do a lot with it. I don't mean the tactile in a very clear sense, so you're being touched by a person or something like that, but even the fact of walking in a space which is not empty is already different. So, how to say, if I go from one room to another, even if I'm in a bubble with a headset and earphones and all these kind of things, even then I will register I'm moving into something different. What do I see? And so there's this in-between thing. And if you go a bit slower, it will become stronger. So this kind of in-between thing, this transitional world, so transitioning from one world to another, one leg in the real and one leg in the virtual. So and actually it fits well in the XR thing, which is a continuum going from the real to the virtual, and somewhere in between is what you are doing with your media. With VR, we are mostly at this side, but not necessarily. And particularly if we go to content or to understanding things, we switch the frame somewhere here so that you are less in immersion and are at the outside or things like that. So these kind of things are interesting. That is what makes XR interesting. That you can choose where you go, and then do you have the tools to choose so freely? Not yet, not yet. And everybody believes that AR is going to be the future because AR, you are in the real world and you superposition another world with it. But we don't really believe in that kind of solution as a solution itself. So, anyway, and the second question is maybe answered by Ishtar. So, I can't hear you.
I didn't hear the question. I was talking.
Sorry. The second question was in relation to the agent and the self. So specifically, was about how you guys deal with the, or if you guys can just dip into what do you mean into the self and this relation with the agents. Also to clarify that for me, like it could be, as I said, an agent is if I see myself in front, then there is an avatar example, for instance.
Yeah, so there's very typical behavior that people have. For example, is when they're in VR, the first things that they do is look at their hands. The second thing that they do is look at their feet. So like this is very classical. So people want to so you're being put in a space, but you don't actually really know where you are. So you're looking for your body in a way to like, okay, where am I? You know, like this is part of like having even like just having a nose or something. It can really change the way you feel in a space. So people want to appropriate the space by having a body, by embodying the experience. And then the things that we, so what I said, it worked very well in 360-degree video, but in the digital and the 3D, it's very hard. Because we could put everybody in a mocap suit, that would help a lot. But we also tried this and it works in a way, but not as good as you would think. So there are different things, but for example, what worked very well is, so I showed you these crowd simulation things that we do, the thing is, we were in a research project and we were waiting for the research to that we could drop it into the installation in a way, in the performance, and because we're in a research project, we do evaluations, we do questionnaires, and ask people how they felt and all these types of things. And the thing that we noticed is before people saw delirious departures mostly as an aesthetic experience where they have some contact with the person. When we started adding the agents, the way that they felt in the installation completely changed. It became a much more radical piece in a way. And so when the crowd comes towards you and the crowd avoids you, they actually shape your body for you. So you don't have a body representation, but you actually don't need one because it is being implied by how the social space exists. So that's a solution for that problem, for example, which is unexpected.
I can add two things to that, because it's also about the self. Huh? So the body is also a construction you make. We worked for a while with an artist who was doing things in space or in non-gravity. I mean, you know, the planes they use for this, so they fall, and then so you have weightlessness for 3 minutes or so. And she said that typically when you were weightless and you didn't see your hands, you had no idea where they were, because proprioception in weightless situations is very different. So you had in a way to deal with it and to construct, to find a way to construct your body, to make it. So in immersion is a bit like that. So you want to construct a presence of yourself in a world. It's an interesting thing. And so in the digital, it works different. And what we have noticed, but which is interesting in itself, it's a bit like in real life, the self is also being constructed through the eyes of the others and with the others. So if you are in a group, so that's where this research in social avatars comes from, kind of things we're doing now, is you know it's about you, the way they react to you. So this reaction, even in slight ways to you, is more interesting now than it was before. So you define yourself, your place, a bit more using the others, which is also like that in real life until a certain level. Huh? So these kinds of things are interesting to see. Okay, so now our work will rather go to it being social instead of working on the self, the construct of the self. Those were answers to the question.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, thank you. I just would like to ask if you are also working on sound, how you work with the sound on this kind of, like the avatar now, I like this social moment that you're explaining now, just before when you don't need a body, that the avatar avoids you. But for example, it could be possible to work with the sound of your voice to deal with the crowds, to say, go there or come, or I don't know. You can, the avatars can also, the crowd can also react to the sound.
Yeah, so we're a bit at I personally I was originally a sound artist and a sound designer, but so the problem is it's not so easy. So for example, when we do a 360-degree video, you get a headset and someone talks in it. It's very effective. So even in 3D, it can be very effective. We showed very briefly the Soul Hacker experience, where a therapist talks to you on headphones. And he kind of guides you through the experience as in therapy, but instead of sitting on a couch, you're actually constructing your environment, which has a lot of transformative potential. So this is one way. But the thing is, it's very effective because the voice is kind of everywhere. It's kind of like the voice of God. It's very efficient. We want to do it also in a 3D space. But it's very hard to combine with the live. So, for example, in Delirious Departures, we have recorded sound, which is running, but to have live sound and 3D sound is still something we have not figured out completely technically, and which is a bit of a frustration of mine in the sense that we have to really make time. I think we have to do a residency or something to really nail this. Because it has a lot of potential, I think. It has a lot of potential. But for example, a lot of people work now on binaural sound. It's very fashionable, but binaural sound does not spatialize very well. I mean, there's some research that goes in that direction, but until now, I've not been impressed. So I think the sound can do a lot, but we're not really there yet in Moy.
What's interesting in all these kind of things is that it's also like a cultural level. That's setting a standard. We made one performance together with an orchestra, the Anima Eterna Orchestra. And so they played the Fifth of Beethoven. They played it in a circle. So to allow us that we could move with the cameras around and at the same time do the recording. So we had recording onto the trolley. That was 360 degrees, very high quality. And then we had binaural microphones. And we had also stereo microphones of the space. So to find a good balance in between the different sounds. So good balance is, so as an immersant, you are walking past along these musicians. You turn your head to the cello. So of course the cellos should sound more clear to you, of course. And with the binaural sound, of course, was working very good at certain moments, but not at all moments. So you make a mix of it. Now, the nice thing about it is sometimes what is not working is beautiful. Eh? So if you had musicians later on in the performance, they immediately came and said, oh, something is wrong here. So how do you have this balance all the time? So they felt, oh, so they're experts in sound, so in all kinds of sound. So that was very interesting to see that. And we have had hours of discussion. What is then the way to make this balance? It's also a cultural thing. Yeah? So at a certain moment there will be a standard that's going to be set. This is the right way to do it. But it's interesting that it's very subjective and there's not yet a standard. But sound, as you say, is in immersion very important, but it's also very difficult.
It's a lot harder than the graphics.
Yeah, immediately when you talk to people who are selling all this kind of, so oh yeah, in sound, and then the sound will direct your head and this kind of things. Well, forget it. So it's very difficult to use it. Very good. And answering to your remark about the actor talking, well, actually, in the beginning, when we were working with this video-based VR, we could not have a sound. We didn't sound. How to say? The problem was that there was a lot of background noise. We needed to cut that, and also we had a problem of telling a story. It was in the beginning there was like, well, not like a nightmare, but for people wanted to have kind of a story. What is this about? And so the interesting thing is, in cinema, that is a framing language. So in a cinema, you say, I show you this image from this point of view after the other image to make you understand so and so and so. That is a language. In VR, you have no idea where a person is looking at a certain moment. You have no idea. So you cannot frame. So how do you then tell a story when someone's walking around? So the simple answer was to have an actor all the time, not all the time talking to you, but talking to you while looking what you were doing. And so it was simply like in theater, like responding literally to, okay, so no, I'm behind you. Oh, you're too late. Oh, you're so slow. No, I'm at the other side. What? Oh, you didn't see me again. And so things like this, little things like this, but it really took people into something. So yeah, a voice is indeed a good tool, particularly when it's live.
Thank you, thank you.
Hi, I'm not in the video, but I'm also in this room. No, I was just wondering, because you're talking about different types of projects, I think, where you're either more on kind of a research side and working with, like, I think Soul Hackers is a project like that, and then more on the production side. And I was just wondering, as a studio, what kind of the ratio between these types of projects are, and where you, like, how you weight them, and how also these different modes of working influence each other, like your kind of the more open-ended research, and then the production ones where it's really about putting something on a stage.
Well, shall I go first?
Yeah, go first, Sasha.
Well, we love research. So it's fantastic that you have the possibility to explore a medium and to go, as we always say, after the nature of the medium. In these projects, you often see that there are lots of engineers inside, and they always have a set, they have an agenda. This is what we want to reach. This is the audience we need it for. And so that defines then the way a medium and the tools are being developed. So we work from another side. We start using all kinds of things, and then say, oh, wow, this is interesting. Wow. So it should go that way. So to be able as artists to work in a research environment is, of course, only for that reason fantastic, because you really explore. And of course, in cinema or in theater, you know the language. So let's say you can make a storyboard before to know, roughly what the effect is going to be. In these kind of media, it's still very open. So this experimentation is absolutely necessary. And if you can be surrounded by a lab, working in a lab environment, of course, is intriguing, because you can ask people, can you go in that direction? You can use what they already have. You inspire each other. And I mentioned in the talk Philip Beckert, who passed away. It was incredible fun to work together in the lab. Not I ask you to do this, but it's really, how to say, exploring together.
Yes, well, I think there's we interact with the research projects in two ways. One is we have, which is also why Eric and I, we work together, we have a dream of where we want to go, and we ask, and it's sometimes technically not possible or very difficult, and then we can ask researchers to help us move in that direction. And so there's interaction. We don't steer the research, but we can kind of push the research in a certain direction, which is going to be beneficial to us. A second thing we do is sometimes we look at people's research, especially like a very like really fundamental research, so not innovation or applied research. And we can see ways of framing it or approaching it or using it, which are sometimes not obvious for researchers or even engineers, because they're very close to the subject matter. And so we can sometimes recontextualize it or reapply it in ways which can be surprising. But for us, the goal is really to, in a research project, get the things that we need to make our artistic things. But this can sometimes be, it's not self-evident, because like researchers, they work on a completely different timeline than artists. Like as an artist, you want it yesterday, and you want to put it in the world, and you want to make your installation, and you want to make people in it, and this is really important to you. The researchers, they want to develop basic technology and then publish a paper, and they're good. So we're very active in the beginning stages of a project, and then we're very demanding at the end stage of the project. But in between, it can be very difficult to keep everything together and to interact because we're not really under the same time pressure, which is challenging but very rewarding as well, because we, like in the present project, to get the crowd simulation in Unreal Engine, we had to have big meetings with Cubic Motion and really had to put the pressure, but in the end we got there, and everybody was really happy and we got a very positive review. So it's
there's backsides. The backside is that most of the time you work in a lab environment, which is of course on tour not practical, and also because there is still an experimental level. People who come and look at it, of course, sometimes are very critical. Huh? So it doesn't do this, or so there's a backside. And also one of the concrete backsides is that, so if you have a government that is subventioning artists, yeah, how to say, they rather like results in terms like you have to tour and to show a lot and perform and et cetera, et cetera. So so that balance is indeed very difficult. But at the same time, for the coming year, we will be mostly doing research and making it ending up in let's say in installations or performances that we'll try to push very far. Simply because we are convinced this is where it needs to be. This is where to go. And for us, it's really clear. That is where we need to be. And all the things you need to do in between are like slowing you down. So there are backsides.
It's also true that inside, so the way we work inside research projects is that we make experimental productions. So we integrate the technology and demonstrate it in some way. But it's not, it can be an artistic production, but it doesn't have to be, but we like it to be an artistic production. But sometimes it's not enough to make a fully fledged production, but it's not the same criteria in a way as in the arts world. But we find our way, and it's a very good model for us, because it would be very difficult to fund our research and development from within arts grants.
It depends very much on the audiences. So if you have, I'd say, in a way, we like to share the research. So even if something is not immediately exactly working, people feel what you are trying to do, or even appreciate, oh, well, this is something that does this, something that did not happen before. So, if you have, as an audience, this kind of mindsets, so that always makes a huge difference. But if you have the mindset of people, okay, show me, tell me, so then sometimes it can be difficult. But of course, you have iterations. So you make a project with it, and then you learn from it, and then you solidify it after a while, and then you make a new thing. Like, for instance, even in the video-based VR, we made in the beginning U and W, and then always using the same scheme, but then every time complicating it a bit, and then adding a story, things like that, and it became to which then was a very good performance at the end. And Terranova was also built up a bit like that, with also a piece before, also with a lot of people, but experimenting with things. So sometimes you need some iterations, and people need you to, and people, also the environment, need to allow you to do it, which is not so evident. So.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Super interesting.
Yes. There's another thing. Of course, you're an artist. You know. So you have always work in progress. Huh? We have years that we really were very scared about this because programmers, I mean producers. So in the festival, they like to produce a lot of things, and then work in progress is then being presented, and people are not aware that it's really in progress. So they say, oh yeah, but it's not doing this, and this is like, we know it's in progress. Yeah, but you're showing it. So at one hand, you need an audience to judge it working what you're doing, but then they need to understand that. So at a certain moment, we really started to cut up everything we were showing. So really to make it clear, okay, so now we stop, and now we show you something else. Cut. And now for 5 minutes of this, cut. So to avoid that people would try to see a storyline, etc., 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 to make it clear this is the work in progress. But I'm sure many of you have been confronted with that problem as well. So.
Which is actually one of my critiques from observing a bit the experimental media arts the last couple of years. It's become very product oriented and not at all process oriented, which I think is a bit of a loss. I think this push to make finished installation and performances does not necessarily make good performances and installation. So the process is very important.
I don't know. So I personally think even, of course, I like to go to theater and ballet and this kind of thing. So, the most interesting pieces are always where there is a risk, when people are taking risks. And that means, of course, that sometimes it will fail. Of course, that's the other side of the risk. It's inherent in risk. But productions which are 100% perfect, dramatized, all in balance, yeah. No, it's nice to see risk. What's at stake? What are people trying to do? Also. And so here, technology is at stake.
For sure, yes. Can I pass on the mic to someone? Does anyone else have a question? No, I don't think so. And who do I give it back to? Well.
Okay.
No more questions? Well, then thank you, Ishtar, Eric, Laurent, everyone. And we'll see you in a little bit here at Imal. So if you come up with other questions, then you can address them directly once they're here at 5 o'clock. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you later.
All right. Bye.